So personally, I have so many thoughts on this movie. I wasn't necessarily sure how to start this review, but I'll start it like this, the only way I know how. The question on everyone's mind, or at least for those who have not yet seen Gladiator 2, the question on your mind, if you are clicking on a Gladiator 2 review, is this movie a worthy enough sequel to the first Gladiator, which I'm sure is hung up in majority of our cinematic Hall of Fame somewhere in our minds? And for those who have seen the movie, the question that you guys are asking before you click on the Gladiator 2 review is this person thinking the same thing I was, in the fact that this was a waste of a sequel? Not only was this a waste of a sequel, you personally could have kept it. And there are people that, gripe about comparisons and comparing one to the other. We have no choice here because the first Gladiator, as I said, is hung up in many of our cinematic Hall of Fames. When we all know where we were the first time we watched the first Gladiator movie. We all know where we were. I just watched it for the first time this year. And we all know how we felt once that movie concluded. We felt like we had just watched some of the greatest cinematic events ever put on screen right in front of our eyes. And so for a movie to have, and it's always risky to do a sequel. It's always risky. It's always a risk to take. Because you just don't know if it can live up to the first one. Sometimes they don't have to. In this case, it had to. Or at least it had to come remotely close, or at least be a worthy enough sequel. Worthy does not always mean better. But it at least had to be a worthy enough sequel. It wasn't even that. It wasn't worthy. Wasn't good. It was supremely average. Hey, at least the action sequences look great, though. The action sequences, at least they look great, though. Guys, this is Gladiator 2. Hey guys, it's your guy in the chair here, and this is my review for Gladiator 2, starring Paul Mescal, Pedro Pascal, Denzel Washington, Joseph Quinn, and it was directed by Ridley Scott. And our story follows, basically the best way I can put it, a man named Lucius, played by Paul Mescal. And basically what happens is his wife dies in battle next to him, and essentially he gets captured by the Romans and is given an opportunity by Denzel to do this. You can either die in the Colosseum, or you can fight for me, and I'll give you the opportunity to get revenge on the guy that killed your wife. That is the best way I can put it, because I do have a very, very big issue with that plot. At least the plot that we thought we were being given when this movie was first announced. Okay, to gather all my thoughts together, guys, as you can tell, I personally did not like this movie, or at least I didn't like it as much as I wanted to. Personally, the more I think about it, and the more I'm probably, after I'm talking about it, or as I'm talking about this movie throughout this review, the more I talk about it, the more I'm more than likely not like the movie, because it was, personally, it was disappointing. But the thing about it was, I never expected it to come remotely close to what the first Gladiator was. All I really wanted was a worthy enough sequel. Like I said, worthy does not always have to be better. I wanted a worthy enough sequel to where the action sequences were a lot bigger and better, and in my opinion, they're pretty close to that. They did a pretty good job in that category. However, I wanted a at least decent enough story for this movie to make sense of why it exists. A decent enough story for us to give us maybe a new hero in Paul Mescal to root for, maybe to write its own chapter in this next tale. I was expecting the story to at least do something worthy enough of the Gladiator name. And it never did that. Story-wise, it never did that. So before I get into all that, let me tell you what I liked about the movie. Like I said, one, the action sequences are outstanding. In my opinion, the action sequences are literally worth the price of admission, but I'm also going to talk about that because this is the same shit that happened in Napoleon. You could say that about Napoleon too, and the story is crap in Napoleon, but we'll save all that for just a second. The action sequences are awesome. The fight scenes are amazing. The hand-to-hand combat, the gladiator battles, the different environments that they put them in, and the different games that they do in the film. I'm not going to expand on that, but I'm just going to leave it to that. The different environments that they put them in, they're really cool. They're really cool ideas, And I'll talk about those ideas once I get to what I don't like. Let me stay on track of what I did like. The action sequences. I'm sorry I keep saying that, but yes, the action in the movie is great. There's a huge battle sequence in the beginning of the movie that's awesome. Like I said, throughout the movie, you're getting introduced to so many cool fight scenes, bizarre fight scenes too. They look okay. I'm going to talk about that as far as what I didn't like. Other than that, the performances in this movie, as far as I'm concerned, are very good. Now, some people will have a problem with one particular performance or maybe two, but I'll talk about that in a second. And I know I keep alluding to what I'm going to talk about in a second, guys. I'm so sorry, but more so, once I get to the point of what I didn't like about this movie, I'm going to go on a huge rant and it'll just be fine. I'll be able to just get all of these thoughts out of my body that has just been building up over the past 2 days thinking about this movie. But the performances are amazing. Paul Mescal delivered, as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned, I thought what Paul Mescal was asked to do, what he was required to do in this movie, he pulled it off to I'm not going to say a perfection, but a very, very S-tier performance, which is damn near perfection. It was good. Like, he was really good in the movie. I love Paul Mescal. I thought he did everything he was supposed to do. Thought he did it very well. What I mean by that is what he was asked to do by the director, who I will talk about him in a second. But Paul Mescal was amazing. Pedro Pascal actually keeps on impressing me. Like I said, I've said this before in other Pedro Pascal movie reviews that I've done, or movie TV reviews that I've done. In the beginning, I was not the biggest Pedro Pascal guy. I've never seen Narcos, but as far as like Kingsman and other things, I've seen him pop up in the beginning of his career, or at least the beginning of when people started to notice who Pedro Pascal was. I was not a big fan of his. I really just wasn't on board with what they were doing. Especially, like Kingsman, Equalizer 2. I just wasn't a fan of those, like his performances in those movies at all. However, ever since The Last of Us, The Wild Robot, and now Gladiator 2, I'm on board. I'm really very, very curious to see what his Reed Richards is. I think he's actually going to be very good as Reed Richards now. I was not a fan of that casting choice, but the more and more I'm watching Pedro Pascal to the build up to the reveal of his Reed Richards, I'm getting more and more excited because he's actually proving to me that he's way more talented. I didn't think he wasn't talented, but like voice acting wise, I didn't think he had that. What he did as Fox in The Wild Robot, I didn't think he had that, but this movie here, he's actually outstanding. Pedro Pascal is very good. He's tremendous as far as I'm concerned. Like him and Paul Mescal's back and forth, they're very good. Denzel Washington is amazing. Like, are we ever going to really say Denzel Washington is not amazing? It is a gift. It is a true gift at this point to say that we get to be able to watch this man work on screen. Like it's something that goes beyond just being able to go to the movies and see your favorite actor on screen. This dude has been doing this for so long that it's at this point, this is an actual moment where he is literally just enjoying the hell out of being able to be in a movie like this and do a performance like this. It's just so joyful to watch. I really had such a great time watching Denzel in this movie. I do have a gripe about Denzel's performance as well, but we'll talk about that later. But everyone, as far as I'm concerned, did a very good job. Joseph Quinn, I thought Joseph Quinn, I'm a big Joseph Quinn stan. I'm going to go to bat for Joseph Quinn no matter what. He was amazing in Quiet Place. He's awesome in Stranger Things. He was amazing in Quiet Place. And in this movie here, I thought he was absolutely fantastic. His name is Fred Heischinger. He was in The White Lotus. He played Joseph Quinn and Fred Heischinger. Hope I'm not saying his name right, but yeah, that's the best way I can pronounce it. They play the Emperor twins, and they have a crazy Arkham Asylum dynamic between the two. And I think Joseph Quinn really is the more level-headed one, of course, because he's the older brother, but he does his crazy's a little more grounded and makes a little more sense. Fred Heischinger, or Fred from The White Lotus, as far as I'm going to say, his is a little more dramatic. His is a little more out there, and quite a few people I talked to said his performance was the most annoying. And personally, while I could definitely see that, for what this movie turns into, I truly think he was just doing what he was told, and he personally did it the best, like a younger, crazier king like that, or an Emperor twin. That's like I think he did that very well. Granted, it was a very silly, crazy performance, but I thought for what this movie was trying to be, like, especially towards the end, he did the best he could. Connie Nielsen. Connie Nielsen was great. But I'm not going to sit here and go through all the performances because, as I said, the performances are good. The performances, as far as I'm concerned, are good. Here's what is not good. Here's what's not good and what has not been good in the Ridley Scott movie for a pretty long time, as far as I'm concerned. Personally, House of Gucci on forward. Last Duel is not a part of this statement. But Ridley Scott has truly got to stop having anything to do with the stories in these films that he is coming out with recently. House of Gucci, Napoleon, and now Gladiator 2. The stories have all been absolutely wonky. And House of Gucci was really all over the place. Napoleon was just focusing on the Josephine factor, which no one was interested in. Like, he really made that a huge part of the movie, and it did not need to be. The movie was too long for us to be focusing so long on Josephine. And here we are in Gladiator 2. Where, as I said, the plot to this movie should be Paul Mescal trying to fight his way through these gladiator battles in order to get to a fight with Pedro Pascal, who killed his wife. Ridley Scott, however, only has that be a portion of the story for at least an hour and 40 minutes of the film, or at least an hour 30 minutes of the film. This movie is about 2 hours and 15 minutes. This movie spends time for at least an hour 20 to an hour 30 doing the Paul Mescal, Pedro Pascal thing. And then the last 40 to 50 minutes of this movie turns into something completely different, which the best way I can describe it is throughout the film, you are led to believe this movie is presenting to you one plot. Then at some point in time, it starts to hint towards other things, which I can't get into because it'd be spoiler territory. It starts to hint towards other things. And then once it confirms those other things, not only do they try to just add that into the story, but they build on top of it and just try to make it its own arc and then present another plot line down the line for it. And then at some point in time, like I said, once the dynamic between, or once the I guess not the dynamic, but the tension or the fight or the problem between Pedro Pascal and Paul Mescal happens, the rest of the movie turns into the Denzel Washington show. On top of that, it turns into literally all the ideas that were presented throughout the first hour 30 of the movie. They shove all of those ideas into the last 40 to 50 minutes of this film, and it makes no goddamn sense whatsoever. The plot is all over the place. It does not know what it wants to be. It does not know what story it wants to tell. And the reason that really ticked me off is because Gladiator was very simple in the story it tried to tell. The story that Gladiator tried to tell was a revenge story. And each Gladiator battle, each battle and the dialogue and stuff before those battles meant something. The dialogue before each battle in the very first Gladiator meant something, and it built up to us actually being able to root for Maximus more and more because he needs these fights to be able to kill Joaquin Phoenix. Everything in the first Gladiator meant something plot-wise. It added something to the story. It really, developed an emotional connection to those characters, to Maximus, being able to deeply root for him. Somebody said it perfectly in my TikTok comments. This movie has no soul. And what I mean by that, it has no emotional connection to these characters. You personally could care less about Paul Mescal's character. You could really care less about his character by the time the last 40 to 50 minutes of this movie happened. Like really what they try to build to, his complete switch in motivation and what his mission is set out to do makes no sense. And I am so sorry I have to keep that so brief. I can't get into spoiler territories, but there is a point in the movie, like I said, once the tension or once the dynamic between him and Pedro Pascal is complete, there's a shift in the movie. It switches to something completely different, and it tries to tell a completely different story than it was already telling, and it just does not work. It does not fit, and it makes no sense. I truly could not wrap my head around how the hell Ridley Scott truly could fumble yet again another, honestly, I would say just another potentially great film. What could have been a great film. He fumbled once again, and it's really getting hard to watch. And the reason I want to go back to something that I said, the reason that I said the last 40 to 50 minutes of this movie turns into the Denzel Washington show. Like I said, Denzel Washington's performance was very good. But in those trailers, there was something we were all curious about. One, how does Denzel Washington, as great and tremendous as an actor as he is, doing the tragedy of Macbeth? So I could actually see it. But he does things like that, and we were still asking ourselves, how does an actor like Denzel Washington fit into Gladiator? He's not even doing any type of voice change at all. He's just being Denzel Washington. Like, he does it to perfection. He kills it in the role. However, majority of the first hour of this film is really what I feel like everybody just gawking over Denzel Washington and everybody going like, oh my God, look how cool Denzel Washington. I can't believe we're in a room with Denzel Washington. That's how I feel like most of the first hour of this movie is. Then the last hour, when they completely ditched the plot that they were literally introducing you in the trailers in the first place, once they ditched that plot, they let Denzel do whatever the hell he wants for the rest of the movie. And it truly, for me, I'm gonna say it just doesn't make sense because of the point that what this movie was building to in the first hour 30 is not what I'm watching in the last 40 minutes. Even if we were going to go in that direction, the movie itself never did a good enough job to truly build up to what you get in the last 40 to 50 minutes of this movie. Like I said, everything in the first Gladiator had a point, had a purpose. Each battle moved the story forward. Each conversation between those battles moved the story forward onto the next thing, making each scene mean more and more and more and more. They don't do that here at all. They try to combine all these ideas, do everything at once, and they shove it all in the last 40 to 50 minutes, and it just really waters down what this movie could have possibly been in the first place. It's truly, really disappointing. And then again, I have to go back to the action sequences. And no, I'm not going to talk about how great they were this time, because one thing I did notice in the action sequences is the over-the-top stuff that they were going for. First of all, the very first fight that Paul Mescal and these other guys from his tribe or village or whatever, his civilization, the guys that were basically with Paul Mescal in the beginning of the movie that had to fight against the Romans, once they dropped these guys off in the Colosseum, their first test of survival is seeing if they can fight genetically modified big-ass monkeys. What? And I'm not talking about like Caesar in the Planet of the Apes. They're not fighting like regular-looking apes or monkeys. They're fighting like long, like 7'5" or 7'6" wingspan, crazy jawline, like crazy monkeys. And it was very entertaining. I was like, well, okay, really? They're going to take up the action a notch and really make it crazier this time. Okay, cool. I expect that in a movie that hasn't come out in, 24 years? It's been 24 years since the first one. So, yeah, I figured they were going to go for bigger and, I guess badder. Not necessarily better, but badder action stuff. But then you get to the point in the movie when you realize that all of these, fights or all of these battles that are happening between the gladiators is literally like this game. They're just having these games to commemorate the fact that they overtook another city, and each of these games are truly meaningless. They don't mean anything in the long run to this story, because like I said, it turns into something completely different. It is a whole theme of basically the fall of Rome and how Rome is just in the hands of these two emperor twins, and it's basically all going to shit. Like, civilization is falling between everybody's eyes, and everybody's trying to overthrow these guys, or essentially they're trying to find a way to give the city back to the people. The problem is they're trying to juggle way too many storylines at once, and once they try to start tying it into all the stuff you saw in the first Gladiator, it's truly just like, what are we doing here, guys? You really didn't know what you wanted to make this story. You didn't really have a purpose for it. So you literally tried to give it every single idea and possible purpose that it could have. And it really just ended up being an epic mess. This movie is an epic mess, just like Napoleon. And honestly, it's really starting to tick me off even more, because Ridley Scott is a brilliant filmmaker. We know this. But my God, man, the movies look great. You're doing a great job, man. But you gotta stop having to do anything with the story, because it's not working. The stories in these films thus far, House of Gucci, Napoleon, and now Gladiator 2, the stories have not been there. The Last Duel is absolutely fantastic, which is why it's so very, very, very confusing at how you can make something like The Last Duel and then come out with these 3 duds. But they're getting worse and worse and worse, and I need him to stop. I need him to really stop. I mean, like, granted, I wouldn't say Gladiator is worse than Napoleon, because at least I did not have to watch anybody whine and mope over Josephine for 2 hours. That is something I will never forgive Ridley Scott for. I will never forgive. I get Vanessa Kirby is hot, but my God, man, show me something else. Regardless, Gladiator 2 is an epic mess, ladies and gentlemen, and the action sequences and the performances, which are entertaining as hell, are the only things that are going to have you invested in this movie at all. In between those scenes, in between the action, there is a high possibility you could go to sleep. There is a high chance. Very, very high chance. I was fighting for my sleep. I was fighting for my life with sleep in this movie. But I made it. I made it all the way through. Was it worth it? Maybe. I don't know. But for all those reasons and so many more, guys, I'm going to give Gladiator 2 a 3 out of 5 stars, which is very disappointing. A 3, you should be way better than that. Okay, guys, so Gladiator 2, have you seen it? What did you think about it? Guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Look, be sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff and so much more. Look, this is your guy in the chair. More content coming to you soon.